Maybe something wrong with the microphone.
She said she was coming back on Sunday.
I think she stayed there.
She stayed longer.
Okay, so let's see if
Wednesday after the Shiva. After Schwartzy Shiva.
Okay.
She's going to come.
who's coming back after me? Oh,
Miriam.
Miriam.
She's staying to Bolivia. She was
In my car, thousands of people.
What?
This guy, Shlomo Schwartz. Shlomo Schwartz.
Yeah,
In my car,
I know, he's like he was a Rebbe. Manny, can you tell me if you can hear me? Because some people said that that they couldn't hear. So just write something if you can.
Thank you, perfect.
Yeah, you can hear me. I'm wondering if on Facebook they can hear me.
It's, the Rob's recording it on his own device as well, right? Rob says thank you very, very much. We've come a time.
So this shir for sure we're doing in memory of Shlomo Ben. Who remembers?
Who remembers his father's name? Did we know it?
You can do his mother's name also. So in any case, we'll do it in memory of Shlomo Schwartzy.
And Bracha's husband's name is Schwartzy too.
Really?
Bracha Schwartz. Their husband's name is Shalom. Shalom, but they call him Schwartzy.
How do I let somebody know that I appreciate it?
No,
This is yours, and this is mine. See, mine says Havala.
long time.
Okay?
Okay.
And that was made by Bracha.
Really? Okay, so I hope they can hear me on Facebook. I don't know. Anyway, if somebody could say yes, we can hear you, like just a little message. But yeah, it's funny.
You're intimidated.
Okay, we're going to start right now. So, okay. So we started everything that we talked about in terms of faith and confidence with the observation that the Ba'al Shem Tov, seeing that we were coming back to reconnect with God in a way that was before the destruction of the temple.
What do you mean he observed when you do it?
We saw this. We saw that the lights were changing in the world, if you want.
What does that mean? Like a prophecy?
It's a type of prophecy. It's like understanding that a shift is coming. You saw the shift. You saw right, and he began to prepare us for that shift. So to understand how things were before, we have to look at one of the most important stories that the Gemara tells us about just before the destruction of the temple, the generation of Rabbi Akiva. And we'll look at one story from one of Rabbi Akiva's contemporaries. And we'll also revisit, I don't know if we've done it here before, I don't think we have, the famous story about Rabbi Akiva and the donkey and the rooster and the candle that everybody knows. We'll retell that story and we'll look at it again. No, we'll retell it. Okay. And most importantly, let me start with a question, which is, why is it that in the middle of the height, the very apex of Yom Kippur, which is the Seder HaAvodah, it's called. It's in the Musaf repetition. When the Shliach Tzibur repeats the Musaf, we have a description of what the service was like in the temple. And right after it ends, and we say, but now we don't have all of these things. It's a very emotional part of the davening on Yom Kippur. And I have to say that every single year, I break down crying very strongly. It's like one of those, and I feel terrible afterwards because my head aches, and I already know it's coming, but I can't help it. It's like this feeling of complete complete despair, like none of this is what we have anymore, suddenly there's this story of the Aseret Harugei Malchut, of the 10 martyrs, if you want, who were killed by the Romans, all of the greatest Talmidei Chachamim of that generation. The greatest of whom was, of course, Rabbi Akiva himself. But another one that we'll talk about today, he's Rabbi Hanina ben Taradion, and we'll talk about his story. Why does that suddenly appear right after the description of we don't have any more of this anymore? We don't have the temple, we don't have the high priest, and we don't have the Urim, we don't have the Tumim, we don't have any of this. We don't have any kind of continued connection with God through, as it were, this communal service. Why do we suddenly read about these 10 martyrs? So the simple answer that's given is because, like we said about everything about Yom Kippur, we want to increase our merits. That somehow, in merit of them, we will merit to have a good seal, a Chatima Tova. Little far-fetched. What, because somebody else sacrificed himself? Right. What does that sound to you like? Sounds very Christian. I agree. Don't buy it. But that's the answer.
Like doing teshuvah for the sale of Yosef?
Right. So if it's like on Tisha B'Av is a whole different story. Right? Tisha B'Av is not... Here, how did we get to this whole thing? We don't have these things anymore. Because we were describing what they used to do on Yom Kippur. So, they used to do that, and we don't have it anymore. What do we have left? Boom, the 10 martyrs.
Yeah.
What is that? How can you say that that's what we have left?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So, the understanding, as we'll see today, is a different understanding in a very different direction, is that the 10 martyrs, they teach us how to survive through the exile. How to make it through, and not only how to make it through, as we'll see, but also where we need to be going in the end. What are we going to sort of fix in front of us as our goal for where we'd like to eventually end up? That's really, I think, what's behind the idea of planting the story of the 10 martyrs right after the Seder HaAvodah, the service of the high priest in the repetition of the Musaf. Okay? So, to begin to understand this, let's retell the story from Rabbi Akiva. Okay? So there's a very, very famous story, almost like one of those stories that, if you grow up in a frum environment, this is something you hear it from your ganenet, from your kindergarten teacher, when you're 3 and 4 and 5 and 6, and by the time you're 8, you've heard it at least 10 times. And by that time you're reading also, and there's a famous series of books called Koasu Chachamenu, all the things that the Chachamim did from the Talmud and from the Medrash. So that story is in the first volume, and it's a big deal. The story is that Rabbi Akiva was walking around the land of Israel somewhere. It's not clear at all where he was. And he took with him, he was going on some trip. The Gemara doesn't tell us where he was going. But he took with him a donkey and a rooster and a candle. Why the donkey? Very interesting. Not to ride on him, but to place his luggage on, the things that he had. He didn't ride on it. It says sometimes maybe when he got tired, he got on it for a little while. But mostly the donkey was used to carry the packages. The rooster, to wake him up at dawn so that he could pray. So he could daven. and the candle so that he could learn at night. So he's walking around, and he comes to some town, and it's nearing nightfall, and he tries to knock on the doors, but nobody's willing to open the door to let him in. So this is apparently a Jewish town, even though it doesn't say clearly. But it's apparently a Jewish town. There were also non-Jews that lived in Eretz Yisrael at the time. So wherever he goes, he can't find lodging. But it's not just that he can't find lodging; nobody's willing to even open the door. This will come in later. We'll explain it. Something that's not explained in the story itself usually. But they didn't even open the doors. So he eventually gives up, and he says the famous phrase that he learned from his Rebbe. He had a number of Rebbes, Rabbi Akiva. One of them was Nachum Ish Gamzu. And Nachum was called the man of Gamzu because about everything Nachum used to say, Gamzu L'Tova. This is also for the best. So he said, he didn't say it the way Nachum said it. Nachum used to say it in Hebrew. And Rabbi Akiva, of course, knows Hebrew. He's a Tana. But he doesn't say it in Hebrew. He says it in Aramaic. And in Aramaic, it's a little bit different. It's Kol Madavid Rachmana L'Tavavid. That all that God does is for the best. So first of all, it mentions God. Nachum, when he used to say it, he didn't mention God's name. He just said, Gam Zu L'Tova. Okay? In fact, you might think that maybe God's name, according to Nachum, is Gamzu. Gamzu L'Tova. Okay? That he has a connotation for God. In fact, it could even be, like we have connotations for it. Hashem is Rachum. Hashem is Chanun. He's merciful. He's compassionate. In Nachum's mind, Hashem is Gamzu L'Tova. That this is all for the best. That's how he sees it. But Rabbi Akiva doesn't say it that way, and that's why it's important that he mentions God in the Aramaic. In the Aramaic, you don't say God. You could say Eloka. There is such a thing. You should go to Facebook.
Yeah.
Try to write it.
Sorry, I'm trying.
So, for Nachum, God's connotation is, this is for the best. For Rabbi Akiva, it's not a connotation anymore. It's more removed. When you have a connotation in a certain sense, it's like you're saying, who is God? He's the one who does everything for the best. That's how I describe him. All the names of God are that.
Right.
They're all connotations, really, the whole Torah is connotations because it's just describing what God does. When Rabbi Akiva says it, he says, Kol Madavid Lachmana, everything that the lover, really Lachmana means the one who loves us, does, everything that God does, he does for the best. L'Tavavid.
Can I ask you, out of curiosity, how could it be a Jewish town and nobody opened the door?
Oh, that's exactly the question. If it's a Jewish town, so the question that right away comes up, if it's a Jewish town, it could be that, so they're afraid. They're afraid of something. So he says, okay, nobody's willing to let me in, so I'm going out and I'll sleep in the field. And he says, Kol Madavid Rachmana L'Tavid, everything that God does is for the best. So he goes out, he sleeps in the field, he sets up his camp, and he lights the candle, and he starts learning. And this is a topic in and of itself. What was he learning from? Why does he need a candle? Somebody would say, but in those generations, the Torah wasn't written, meaning the Torah Shebaal Peh, the Mishnah was not written, and to learn means to say Mishnayos, and the Mishnayos were all Baal Peh. So we know that that's not exactly the case. There were Mishnayos before. It was just that Rebbe, at some point, wrote them down openly so that you could teach from a written book. But before then, people had private books that they kept to themselves, especially somebody of the stature of Rabbi Akiva, and so he was learning from his written book, whatever his written book contained. That's just on a side note. It's an interesting topic in and of itself of when the Torah Ba'al Peh, the oral Torah, was committed to writing. So he's learning, and suddenly a wind blows and blows out his candle. So apparently he can't light it again. It's not clear why. But maybe even if he can, his immediate reaction is Kol madavid ochman al tavavid. Everything that God does, he does for the best.
He understands the message immediately.
Okay.
He goes to sleep.
Then,
Has a dream.
a few minutes before he gets a chance to relight it, some kind of mountain lion or cat, large cat, comes, and it attacks the rooster and kills it and eats it. So now he doesn't have a rooster, but he says, "Kol madavid ochman al tavavid." Everything that God does, he does for the best. And then it says that a lion came out and it ate the donkey. It killed the donkey and ate him. And Rabbi Akiva continues with his stance. Kol madavid ochman al tavavid. Everything that God does, he does for the best. Then the sages tell us that in the morning, after all this happened, he looked down or looked away and saw the town that he had tried to find lodging in the night before. And he saw that all the people in the town were being led away by, it just says gaisot, by troops. What's the story behind all this? So the story is pretty clear. The story is that this is the time of the rebellion against the Romans. It might be before the destruction of the temple, it may be after the destruction of the temple, it's not clear. Rabbi Akiva's life spanned from before the destruction till after. It's not clear here whether he's a young man or an old man, even though he was at least 40 years old, because before then he wasn't learning. Which is another topic in and of itself I don't want to get into. Did Rabbi Akiva really start learning only when he was 40? It's another question that in other sources in the Gemara doesn't sound to be so simple. In any case, it leans more towards the big rebellion, the Bar Kochva rebellion that Rabbi Akiva organized and was a part of about, I think, 40 or 50 years after the destruction of the temple. We're talking about 130 CE. And during that time, he was wanted by the Romans, not just because he was teaching Torah, but also because he was organizing a great rebellion against the Romans.
So that's why they didn't want to open the door.
So one option is that they wouldn't let him in because this particular town was afraid of being associated with a rebellion. That's one option. It's not a very positive option. A more positive option is that they were alerted beforehand that there would be spies or somebody else trying to infiltrate into their town. So they weren't willing to open any doors. They didn't know it was Rabbi Akiva. It's also, by the way, it's very difficult to imagine in those times that people would just know what somebody looked like. I mean, today you don't know what a lot of people look like, and there's so much media. So as much as Rabbi Akiva was famous, they didn't have his picture in the newspaper. They didn't have any way to really know if this was him or somebody else. So I don't think it was personal. But it was a fear that something is about to happen. And eventually it really happened. But Rabbi Akiva is saved from all this. Now, the thing that's really troubling about this whole story is that this is supposed to be a story about how you're saved. It's supposed to tell you, this is why the kindergarten teachers tell us about this, because look, if you say, Kol ma David Rachman al Tavavid, if you believe that everything that God does is for the best, you'll come out unscathed from whatever the situation is. Right? That's the moral of the story. What's a problem with that? Because it's very nice that he came out of it, but what about the whole town?
That's what I'm saying. Rabbi Akiva must have felt horrible.
So he must have felt horrible. Like, I came out of this okay, but what about them? So this raises a real
Maybe that's
problem.
Are you saying that might be why he got motivated to lead the rebellion?
maybe that led to... No, okay, I don't know. That's an interesting idea. I think that historically it's almost impossible for us to tell exactly when this happened. By the way, there's another famous story about Rabbi Akiva, which has no other source except for the Pesach Haggadah. There's no other source anywhere. There's a similar story about other sages, but nothing like this one, that there were 5 sages communed in Bnei Brak, and Rabbi Akiva is one of them, and they talk about Yetziat Mitzrayim, they talk about the exodus from Egypt, as you're supposed to, on the night of the Seder, until daybreak, until the dawn came up. And then their students had to knock on the door and tell them, Rabboteinu, Zman Kriyat Shema Shacharit, it's time to say Shema in the morning. So there's an interesting theory that's been going around for the last, I think, 30, 40 years in the research, is that this is another story from the time of the rebellion, the Bar Kokhba rebellion, and that it's all written in code, which is why we don't have it in any other source. And really what was going on was that they were planning the rebellion, and they called it Operation Yetziat Mitzrayim, or something like that. And when the students came and knocked on the door and said, Higeh Zman Kriyat Shema Shacharit, it wasn't even dawn, it was just a sign between them that the Romans are coming. So there's a lot that goes on around this whole story with Rabbi Akiva and Bar Kokhba. Even just the fact that Rabbi Akiva was almost ostracized, you could say, by the rest of the sages of his generation, or many of the sages of his generation, because he participated in the Bar Kokhba rebellion. There were a lot that said that it's not proper for us to try to rebel against the Romans now that we've seen that God destroyed the temple. Rabbi Akiva felt, and that was his argument, that it doesn't matter that the temple was destroyed 40 or 50 years ago. We have to do what we can to reinstate our autonomy, to reinstate our independence, and so on, right away. And if we had anything to pay in terms of our sins and so on, we've already paid for it. We don't have to do anything more. Anyways, the Rabbi Akiva had a very, what today would be understood as a militant stance. That's how he's interpreted today. Now, if you understand what a sage at the level of Rabbi Akiva is about, so you understand that even if he had a militant stance, even if he himself felt that we needed to fight for our independence, that's not what he had to contribute to the whole uprising. I mean, he's not going to contribute telling people how to, use a sword better than something else. What Rabbi Akiva would contribute is what should be your outlook, what should be your spiritual, religious outlook, hashkafa, or philosophy, that would strengthen the rebellion in an emotional, psychological way, and not in the sense of teaching you how to make war. That wasn't his thing, and he was also very old then. He must have been close to 80 or 90 years old already. So even if you say he has some kind of militant stance, that's not his point. His point is to teach you how to come out on top, how to believe that God is with you, and what does that mean that God is with you? Okay. So to fully understand the story that we just told about Rabbi Akiva, about this town that eventually all were taken into Roman custody, and they eventually, I imagine, were sold as slaves. So we have to start from the fact: why did Rabbi Akiva change what his teacher Nachum Ish Gamzu taught him? Nachum Ish Gamzu used to say Gamzu letovah. He didn't mention God, and he said it in Hebrew, that this is for the best. Rabbi Akiva changes it into Aramaic, and more than that, he mentions God. Not only that, but if you think about this phrase that he's saying, he says, Kol ma de'avid rachmana, everything that God does, he does for the best. Meaning you have twice doing. And there's what he does, and now it's my interpretation of what he just did. He did it for the best.
So it's not just like if something happened, it's l'tova. It's like it's an active, like Hashem
Right.
does
It's an
something,
interpretation.
He does it for, okay.
You have to interpret.
Okay.
What's the difference between them? So the main difference, first of all, in terms of the language, that when you speak in Hebrew, you're talking about holiness. It's a direct connection to God. When you speak in any other language, and all the other languages are represented by Aramaic, okay? Aramaic was the universal language during most of the ancient period. Today you might say it's English, but it remains Aramaic. When you speak in Aramaic, you're going down into the lower reaches, the lower spiritual reaches of reality. Okay?
Again, we're going down to lower.
To the lowest levels, lowest spiritual levels of reality. So Rabbi Akiva, when he translates Nahum's words into Aramaic, he's already saying that this type of thinking is fitting for the time that you go out into exile, where you don't have revealed holiness in the world. The Beis HaMikdash, the temple, is revealed holiness. When a person would come to the Beit HaMikdash, when a person would come to the temple 3 times a year, why is it so important? So, first of all, God says, come. But why is it so important? We talked about this many times. Because every person that would come would leave with a roadmap for what he needed to do that year. Okay? That was the main purpose, or you could say the main takeaway message of having a Beit HaMikdash, that it was clear to the individual, not just in terms of what a prophet might say or not say to him. It was a clear message that he received while being there, that this is what my goals for the coming year or for the coming half year should be until the next time that I come. Meaning the whole thing that we are challenged by, and it makes it so difficult for us, this question of what is my purpose? What am I doing here?
To know it. What if we don't like it?
Maybe you don't like it, but you can at least relate. Okay? I like it or don't like it. I have something to relate to. We are in a state of hastara, of concealment, where we don't know. Okay? We're almost like shooting in the dark, and once in a while we get to see the target and see whether maybe we're close or not close, and it's not clear at all. That's exile. That's what it means that you're not in holiness. To be in holiness, to be able to experience the holiness of the temple, means for the individual, whether it's a Jew or a non-Jew, it's the same thing. That when you come to the temple and you partake in the service, what is the service that a person performs? He comes to see and to be seen. That's what it's called. It's called mitzvah re'ayon.
It's not for the
It's a
korban?
mitzvah. It's a korban. You bring a korban, which is called a korban re'ayon. You bring a sacrifice that's a korban re'ayon, which can be almost anything. And when you've performed that sacrifice, you're privileged to see like a prophet, to see at the level that you need to see. It doesn't solve your problems, but it's telling you what the direction that you need to, what you call it, your mission is supposed to be. It becomes much clearer, and life can be more focused. It's not, like you said, you might not like it. Like he's telling you, look, you have this negative trait, and this year, this is what you have to work on. So I have 1 million negative traits. I don't know which one to work on. He tells you, no, clearly, this is what you need to do. There's a knowledge that focuses where my efforts go, because I can't do everything. So we're standing in a state of lack of holiness, and that's where Rabbi Akiva finds himself after the destruction of the temple. So he says the same thing in the language of translation, in the language of the nations, which is already that we don't have holiness, what we can do is interpret. We can interpret what's happening, but it's very hard for us to know where to go. Nachum, he used to say, Gam zu letova. What zu? This, here. What I see here. It's not kol madavid rachman. It's not a passive statement. That's why he also doesn't even mention God. Nachum. For him, this is for the best. That is God. Okay? It's a positive state of mind that says, what does it mean, God? God means goodness. So if I'm living in the world with Hashem, it means that I'm seeing everything in a positive way. That's how Nachum saw it. But Rabbi Akiva, Nachum passed away before the temple was destroyed. Not many years, but I think about 5 years before the temple was destroyed. Rabbi Akiva, he's living after. So for him, it's already a passive, interpretative approach to seeing godliness in the world, to seeing goodness in the world. Meaning, things happen, and it's up to me to sort of sign them with a signature that says, this is also good. Okay.
So when thinking when you're in exile, then you have to have Hashem's name in the...
Again, and actually having the name is almost being more removed. Because it's not directly what I see. I'm living sort of reflectively. I reflect off of reality.
So
Okay.
for Nachum, it's so obvious. Everything is for the best.
Right.
Hashem is here.
Right.
Obvious does not even have to be
Right.
said.
If to use the language that we used, I think 2 or 3 classes ago about the subject-object split. So for Nachum, before the destruction of the temple, there is no subject and object. They're the same thing. That's why he also doesn't really mention Hashem. He doesn't need to.
Right.
Because it's so clear that what I have here is Hashem. That's it.
Right.
I don't have to, but for me, and especially as time went on and the exile goes deeper and deeper and deeper until you could say even, and I think I said that then, that I don't know whether the Ba'al Shem Tov ever heard of Kant or not, but Kant is about 70 years before the Ba'al Shem Tov. But sort of having a little bit of a feel for what the Ba'al Shem Tov, what type of person he was, he heard hints of it. He heard something about it. He knew something about this. So that was maybe even a sign that if the nations are now saying that subject and object are split, then I and the world are 2 separate things, so that's the end of the exile. It can't get any worse. Because exile, by definition, is things are torn apart, they're removed. And what's more basic than our experience as human beings, that you come to a realization, which is not really a realization as much as it's a tragedy, that I cannot trust my interpretation of reality anymore. That reality is one thing and I'm something else, and who knows what reality is really objectively like. That subject-object split is the worst form of exile that you can have. It creates the exile from yourself also, because eventually you become an object. You become your object. The type of things that go on today with psychologically, the challenges that people face, like homosexuality, gender issues, now it's age issues, all these things are the result of this subject-object split.
What's an age issue? You mentioned it yesterday. What's an age issue?
That there are now people who are 50 years old who identify themselves, they call themselves trans age, that they're a 6-year-old girl.
What?
That's how they want to live.
Oh, no.
So they find adoptive families. Now, truthfully, I haven't had time to look into this. Yeah, sort of like you said that, but it's so I haven't had time to really research or talk to people who've dealt with this, but I'm always concerned that it's a sexual issue. But here, I'm sort of like, I don't know what I'll find yet, but I'm not sure it's a sexual thing. It might be and it might not
There is
be.
a rectified. Yesterday we also talked about 7, whatever. You know, like
Yeah,
we're
no,
supposed to see ourselves.
that's in me.
Okay,
So
okay.
but that's something entirely different. Here, there's a person who says, it's like people who are transgender, they say, I always felt that I'm really not the sex that my body tells me. That is a terrible subject-object split. Because objectively, what are you? Whatever my physical gender is. And now you come and the person says, but I feel completely different. So what happened? The subject split from the object. That's exile. So when the Ba'al Shem Tov heard, I'm saying it in terms of theory at least, when the Ba'al Shem Tov saw that, he already knew that it doesn't get any worse. That's the lowest point that exile can come to when it affects you. The fact that the Jewish people are torn from their country, that's a split. It's true. The fact that you're torn from your Torah, you're torn from your temple, and so on, all these things, these are all splits. But when it becomes that, you're torn from yourself. Or at least at his time, it was being torn from the reality that you live in. You can no longer trust your interpretation of what you're seeing. That's the ultimate split. In any case, we already hear this in what Rabbi Akiva is saying, that Kol Mada'avilachman, Hashem does something, Letavavid. And I'm saying that it's for the best. By Reb Nachum, there's nothing like that. It's just Gamzu Letavat. Everything is for the best. That's it. This too, this too, this too. Everything is this. We also say that in terms of Moshe Rabbeinu's Nevuah, his prophecy versus the other prophet's prophecy. Then Moshe Rabbeinu, this was just what we read on Shabbos, is the first time that Moshe Rabbeinu says this, Zeh Adavar. This is the thing. This. So Zeh is the masculine form, and Zu, that Nachum used to say, is the feminine form. So he says this is the thing, because Moshe Rabbeinu has no split between his consciousness and God. It's completely connected. But the other prophets, all they can say is Ko Amal Hashem. In English, you have to say the word this, but really you'd say this is an approximation of what Hashem said. Ko is Kafa Dimyon. It's this is similar to what God said. I haven't heard God Himself, but I hear a reflection from Him. I hear something that's further away.
I like when Captain Picard says, make it so.
Right. So is this. Ze Adavar. So that's the first thing, that Rabbi Akiva is already taking into his calculations about what he's saying, this distance that's already been formed, that the holiness is no longer entirely in the world, and what you do is you interpret. But there's something more about this than just that it's in Aramaic and that it's distant from the holiness. It's that the story about Nachum and when he used Gamzu L'Tovah is very different from the story about Rabbi Akiva that we just told. Nachum's story was that he was sent to Rome, all the way from Yerushalayim. He was sent to Rome to bring a peace offering to the Roman emperor. And this is also one of the stories in Koasu Chachamenu, in the first volume that you learn when you're 5 or 6 years old. And everybody also knows the story. So on his trip, he was given a box full of great treasures to bring to the Roman emperor as a peace offering, and to try to get him. I don't know what Bibi is bringing Trump tomorrow. I don't know, what do you buy the man who has everything? I would bring him some soil from the Holy Land, as cliche as that is.
Maybe he will.
So, thus rather than this, tells me Miriam, right? So you can say Ko Amar Hashem is thus says Hashem, as opposed to Zeh Adavar, which is this is what God says. So thus is like more relative. In any case, it's great that other people are listening and they can help me get my English right. It's not Miriam Rhodes, it's Miriam Weed, actually, Miriam Friedman. You know.
Oh, can I say hello to her?
Okay. So he, on his trip, which was a long trip, you have to take a boat and go to Greece and then go to Rome. So somewhere along the road, he's staying in some inn, And the innkeeper comes in at night, and he forces open the treasure chest, and he sees all the riches there, and he wants it. He steals it, and so that Nachum doesn't notice, he fills it up with sand. Okay. Unbeknownst to him, Nachum continues on his journey, and he arrives in Rome, and he gets an audience with the emperor, and he comes in front of the emperor, and he places the chest, is brought in. He says, "This is from the people of Judea. This is what we give you as an offering of peace." And okay, so pleasure first, business after. So he opens up the treasure chest, the emperor, and he sees sand inside, sand and stones. Of course, he gets very angry. And then suddenly, one of his advisors says, "It can't be that the Judeans sent you earth from the Holy Land, right? Because they don't even see it as a holy land yet. So this is not to mock you. It must be that this is something special. What special thing is this?" So he says, their first patriarch, Abraham, he was a great warrior. How did he win his wars? Because he said, "V'anochi afar ve'efil," that I am dust and ashes. Afar ve'efil. Maybe what the Jews send you is some of that special, magical afar ve'efil, the special magical dust and ashes. So the emperor is like, it makes more sense. I mean, they're smart people. What they would send a great sage with nothing to mock me. So he says, "How do you use this?" So this advisor, later we learned that Eliyahu Hanavi came into him, or an angel became incarnate into that advisor. So he says, what you do is you take the dust and you throw it. And when you throw it, it becomes these magical arrows and other weapons, and with these you can't lose. And it turns out that he's right. They throw it, and it turns into weapons. What's the key to this story? That at the moment that Nachum saw that there was dust inside, he said, and his heart sank, obviously. So his heart didn't sink. He said,
This must be
"Gam zulatov." And that forced, as it were, the shift in the story, so that this advisor would suddenly come and say, well, what we're really talking about is some kind of magical dust. And it's really a tremendous gift that the Jews have given you, the emperor. What's the main difference? That Nachum's attitude changes reality, whereas Rabbi Akiva's can only interpret. It can only interpret. He's not able to save, Rabbi Akiva is not able to save the inhabitants of that town that wouldn't let him in. Especially if they're Jews, of course his heart is broken, but he knows that that's part of what it means to be in exile. That I am distanced from acting, I have very little influence over reality, and the most that I can do is interpret it positively, and so at least some of it is saved, apparently. But there's no promise even of that. That's what exile is. To be exiled really means to not be able to influence reality. That's what it means. It's not a state of necessarily being away from the land of Israel. It's that too. But that doesn't cover it. That's not a sufficient description of what it is. The sufficient description, the full description is that exile is a state in which you are not the master of reality anymore. Your faith and confidence in God is not enough to change reality.
What's it saying? That it's not enough to change realities. So basically, a person has to flip from one consciousness to another.
What are you referring to?
I interpreted it into, like, let's say if I want to have a good influence on my family, and I cannot. I guess I'm also taking what you said yesterday, that it's more magical if you make a person make a change in their life as opposed to convincing them about something. I can't convince them about something, but I would like to be able to say something or be there for them so they can flip and if
Right.
I'm not able to do that, that means that I still
Can
am
interpret.
I'm in the interpretation.
I'm in the interpretation stage.
And can a person go from one, I mean, that's what we're supposed to do, to go from this.
Exile means when I'm in a state of exile, and it can be a personal exile, it can be a communal exile, it can be a national exile, is that at each of these levels we're not able, as individuals or communities or nations, to influence, to change the course of reality. And so what are we left with? We're left with a relationship with God that places our connection on interpretation. Meaning, I have to almost give up on the fact that it's going to turn out the way I want it to turn out. Okay?
But what does that mean for me? Let's say I'm not able to influence and I can only do interpretation. Can I do work to go to switch my awareness into a Nahum kind of awareness?
Yeah, how do you do that?
Okay. So if the exile is over, I can start going in that direction.
Okay.
Meaning when the Ba'al Shem Tov comes onto the scene and he sees that the light of Mashiach is beginning to shine in the world, so he says we have to start moving from our interpretative stance to our what I would call creative stance. Okay? A stance in where you become partner with Hashem in creating reality. I'm no longer only interpreting reality, I'm now fashioning it, I'm constructing it in the way that I want. Based again on my service of God, my mission in life.
So you're returning back?
So I'm turning back towards Nahum.
To Nahum.
And again, Nahum is very interesting. He's at the very end of the Second Temple period, and he's on a mission to the Roman Emperor, meaning this is not exactly a state of autonomy, but yet he still retains that stance that says that even here, when I'm the servant, as it were, before the emperor, I can still fashion reality the way that I would like to, in the direction that I want it to go. To say it another way is when somebody is very ill, for instance, God forbid. So there are two attitudes that you can take. One is that I have to interpret everything that's happening to me as a blessing. I can't influence the course of my ailment, but I can influence how I react to it. I'm a reactant, I'm not active. So my activity is only how I relate to what I've seen. So if it's very difficult for me and so on, so I use it as a call it a stepping stone to doing other things with myself, but I have no influence over the reality of my illness. When the Rebbe says, think good and it will be good, he's already pushing us in the direction of the Ba'al Shem Tov, which is that you do have some influence over where it's going to go. Meaning, it's not just about how you're going to take it. And I don't know if we talked about this, but you know that there was, in the Middle Ages, there was a great dispute about what free will is. What is free will? I think we mentioned this. The Rambam holds that free will means that you are free to act as you want. But the Rambam had a very big disputant. He was a great, great sage himself, Reb Chazdai Kreskas. He lived about 100 years later, and he argued with the Rambam, and he said, no, that free will is not about what I can do. Free will is only how I react. Meaning, he even said this at a very deep level, that even when I do an Aveira, I do something wrong, my free will is only whether I regret it or not. But not whether I did the Aveira. Not whether I did the sin or not. I have no control over that. That's already been predetermined. What's not been predetermined is whether I will regret it or not. That's all. That's where free will is. The Rambam is closer to a state of redemption, where to have free will means that you can act freely in the world. You can change things. Chazdai Kreskas is closer to a state of exile, where the most that you can do with free will is freely determine your reaction to the things that happen to you. But again, this is very, very far-reaching. One of the reasons of Chazdai Kreskas writes this is because he was in the beginning, it's more than 100 years, more like 200 years, he was in the beginning of the Inquisition. Before the Inquisition even became official, there were entire communities that were forced to convert to Christianity, to accept Christianity. And one of them was his son. He had one son, and his son preferred to die. Kreskas. His son preferred to be killed rather than to convert. And there's even a statement that maybe what he's saying was to tell other people not to do what his son did. Don't pay with your life. The most that you can do is regret that this is the reality. It's very, very far-reaching understanding of what he's saying. So you have to understand, we're not talking about somebody who's second level or minor league Yiddishkeit. We're talking about Reb Chazdai Kreskas. If you know, he was the greatest sage of his generation.
So he was saying,
you have to accept it
and then regret.
and live inside with it, which in a certain sense is what tshuva is like. Do you really have control? So today, people don't. One of the reasons that he's not learned so much today, at least his philosophical work called Or Hashem, is because we as a people have pretty much not adopted that direction. Meaning, as much as this is an opinion, it wasn't adopted by most people. Rather, the direction was more that you have to sacrifice your life and not convert to Christianity. That was the but we know that there were few people who actually did that. And in reality, most of the communities that were faced with this, I don't know if most, whether it's half and half, or it's 40%, I don't know what the numbers are exactly, but there were a tremendous number of Jews who preferred not to sacrifice themselves. But there were also many that did. So the two opinions existed.
The Ramchal, he discusses it in Derech Hashem. What is his opinion?
I don't
Just
know the
Yerushalayim,
Ramchal.
I think, is the
I
only.
don't know the Ramchal well enough. I used to know him before I learned Chassidus, but I have forgotten.
Okay.
So
And he discusses it in great detail.
it could be. Okay. So let's continue.
Miriam. Can you pass out popcorn?
The next story is, so Rebbe Akiva is one of the 10 martyrs. And he's leading a direction of change in how much we can influence reality. And he's saying, once the temple is destroyed, we don't have this ability to influence reality as much as we did before. We're more interpretative. He had a friend whose name was Rabbi Chanina ben Teradion. Rabbi Chanina was a sofer. He used to write Torah scrolls. The Gemara in Avodah Zarah, I wanted to bring Avodah Zarah, but I told you I came out of town, so I was going to take a Gemara from where I was, and I said I'd return it next week or whatever. And I looked through everything that there was on the shelf, And just Avodah Zarah was the only one that was missing. So it's a sign from Hashem that I have to say it by heart and not and not from the writing. But maybe if I'll go back and look at it later, and maybe if there's some. So I can't because we're using the. Okay. Anyway, Rabbi Chanina ben Taradion, is another one of the 10 martyrs that we mentioned in the Musaf of Yom Kippur, right after the service in the temple. And he was killed for what? So the Gemara tells us that he was placed in a Roman jail with his wife, and his daughter was taken to a Kuba shel Zonot. And the Romans had these, harems or whatever else, where they kept women that they used as prostitutes would be the wrong translation because it wasn't for pay. Sex slaves. So he had a daughter, and he had a wife, and he had himself, and they were all arrested. And when he was arrested, one of the other sages came to see him. His name was Yehuda ben Kisma.
Oh, is he in Meron?
Yeah, right. He's there. So Yehuda ben Kisma says, "You know why you were arrested." So Rabbi Chanan ben Taradion says, "What can I do?" And then the Gemara says that Rabbi Yehuda ben Kisma told him, "But I told you not to do it. I told you a long time ago, don't do these things." So Rabbi Chanina ben Taradion says, God should have mercy. He said that then, when Rabbi Yehuda ben Kisma told him the first time, and he said it when he was already in jail. What was he doing? So we may have mentioned this, but we'll do it more in length today. He was pronouncing God's name as he wrote it in the Sefer Torah. It's actually pronouncing it, which is something that you're not allowed to do. And why was he doing it? So if you remember from last week, we said that the strongest power that we have is to, as it were, to borrow from the future. How do we borrow from the future? You make a vow in God's name. So what was he actually doing? He was trying to bring about the redemption by borrowing energy that the Jewish people didn't have at that time. So he was basically sacrificing himself for the benefit of the many. But he was doing it in a way that Rabbi Yehuda ben Kisma told him, don't do this because it won't turn out right. And he was right. He was arrested. They found out that he was writing Torah scrolls. And eventually they also killed him. How did they kill him? They wrapped him up in the Torah scrolls that they caught in his house, and they burned him with them. And he kept saying, Hashem Yelachem. That's where that's by the way, where the phrase comes from. Hashem Yelachem, from him. When I say, God help us, Hashem will have mercy, will be compassionate, that's from Rabbi Chanina ben Taradion. Terrible death.
That he's saying that God will have mercy in the future?
Very good, very good. He's saying it as Rabbi Yehuda ben Kisma is telling him when he's still writing the Torah scrolls and pronouncing Hashem's names. Rabbi Yehuda ben Kisma tells him, stop. At least ostensibly on the outside, he's telling him stop because the Romans are going to find out. But really, he's also telling him, stop pronouncing God's name. And so he answers, Hashem will have mercy. What do I mean Hashem will have mercy? What can I do? This is what I need to do. This is what needs to be done. I have no, whether it's on writing the Torah scrolls, people need Torah scrolls, or whether it's about his pronouncing Hashem's name because he feels this is the only way to conquer the Romans, to win against the Romans. because what has been taken away from us, like we learned from Rabbi Akiva just now, the possibility of actively affecting reality. So he's saying, in the future this will come back. We will have that power again. But I want to bring it now. In the same way that a person makes a vow to perform a mitzvah, even though he doesn't have the ability to perform it right now, the vow, which we said is the shvu'ah, it comes from the number 7, taps into what's beyond the 7, the 8, the supernatural as it were, what's above my head, and it brings down energy from my future. So he was trying to do the same thing for the entire people.
So when he's saying Hashem Yerachem, was that for the Klali, for Am Yisrael,
Right.
for the cloud, not just for himself?
Not just for himself, for both of them. Because in the future, Hashem will, it's true, He will have mercy in the end. So I want it now. Meaning he's not saying Hashem Yerachem in the sense of heaven help me. He's saying Hashem Yerachem. This is the only way to bring down the mercy from the future now. I want it now. I don't want it in the future.
It kind of goes back to what the Christian interpretation, but it kind of fits in that by him doing that was he sort of bringing it to his present in order to deflect it from the future, that it would happen.
It's not deflecting it. He's borrowing it.
Uh-huh.
Saying since this will eventually happen, I want it now.
Anyway, it's going to happen.
Okay.
So when was it legitimate to borrow from the future? Do we have any examples?
So before the destruction of the temple, so you could say that the high priest said this for everybody during Yom Kippur. Not only that when was the full name pronounced every day? During the priestly blessing. V'samu et shmi al b'nei Yisrael v'ani avarochem. They shall place my name on the Jewish people, and I will bless them. Well, what's with the name? That they would pronounce the name as they were blessing. That's what the Gemara says in Masechet Brachot. Ayu mavli'im et Hashem. It was somehow between all of them. I don't know how many priests stood on the steps leading up to Ezrat Yisrael leading up to the Heichal every day. But there were probably hundreds of them. And as they blessed together, there were the elder priests, who knew how to say the name, and yet that it wouldn't be heard. They would pronounce it in a way that nobody could fully distinguish how you do it,
But it didn't save the
but
temple.
they said it for everybody.
It didn't save them.
What?
It didn't save the temple.
Because that already was a different problem. But it blessed every person. That's really what the priestly blessing is about, is to put Hashem's name on me. And instead of me saying it,
What did it do?
so for the individuals it worked. The individuals who heard the priestly blessing, they received what they needed to receive. What you're saying is, why didn't they bless the
Temple. Right.
It's not just to bless
Right.
the temple.
Well, if
The
the
temple
people
is
were
more
blessed,
than just
then they
a...
wouldn't have desecrated the temple.
Maybe. Or maybe when you bless people and they're successful, maybe that's exactly why they stop being so careful, because they already have everything they need. In any case, who is Rabbi Chanan ben Teradyon? Why did he deserve this terrible fate? He's doing something good. So the Arizal says that he's a reincarnation of, remember our story about Yiftach. Yiftach HaGiladi is Rabbi Chanan ben Teradyon. The Arizal is very sensitive. You could say that the Arizal is a prophet, and so therefore he sees things that he heard something about. Eliyahu Navi told him. But when you just read what he says, and you understand the connection, so you say this is like just insight. It's tremendous insight into who Rabbi Chanan ben Teradyon is. He's the same person, he's the same character as Yiftach, but in a rectified way. What did Yiftach do? Yiftach had to go fight the Canaanites. And he made a vow What was the vow? That if Hashem allows me to win, then I will sacrifice the first thing that comes out of my house to greet me. And eventually it was his daughter. So by the way, it says that who the whole family is the family of Yiftach. The Rabbi Chanina ben Taladion became is Yiftach. His wife, who died with him, is Yiftach's wife, because in that story you have to ask, his wife wasn't around to stop him? What are you saying? It's so important for you to win this that you're willing to sacrifice the first thing that comes out? What if I come out?
No.
So at least said that. So she was present and she didn't say a word. It says the same thing about Rabbi Chanina ben Taladion's wife, that she heard that this was what he was doing, that as he was writing the Torah scrolls, he was pronouncing God's name to again bring this power into the people, and she did lo michtabo. She didn't object. What about the daughter? The daughter, who, according to the pshat of Sefer Shoftim, she was sacrificed. But according to Chazal, she was never sacrificed. She didn't do anything wrong. She was just a spinster. She wasn't allowed to marry. That's the same thing as not having children. Is the same thing as dying. So she was Rabbi Chanina ben Taladion's daughter, who was put into a kubav, into this this house of sex slaves. Who was she saved by? She's Bulia. She's the famous Bulia. And she was saved by Rabbi Meir, who then married her. It says, why was she saved?
But no kids.
No, they had children.
No, you said.
Rabbi Meir had, in this incarnation, she has
In the one before.
the one before she didn't
Right.
have. But here, no, I made it wrong. There were two daughters. The daughter that went into the sex slave place was the other daughter.
Not Bulia,
Bulia was the one who was married to Rabbi Meir, and she convinced Rabbi Meir to go save her sister. Sorry, I got it wrong. Okay?
Sister
And did they take her out, and who did she marry? Did it mention that she married?
I think it does, but I don't remember. That's why I should have. That's why I wanted the Gemara, because I don't remember everything.
Did you ever see this video of the Rebbe where he cries?
I've seen a lot of videos.
I know,
where
but there's this one that I didn't understand. Like it made an impact. I didn't understand the whole thing, but I think he was crying the fact that we're convinced about that second attitude. Like when are we going to wake up and stop saying that, things are happening that way for the tova, for this? Like, when are we going to stop being convinced about this? Did I understand? Like, I wasn't sure I understood.
And do what?
But I saw him, like, he was crying there.
And do what? Stop being convinced and do what?
That all you can do is interpret,
Yeah.
and you have to move to a state of affecting reality.
That we see, like, not negative, like, difficult things happening, and sort of accepting it more and more, or becoming more, okay,
Okay, so now, why is this also very interesting?
That's what it is.
When the Rav taught this years ago, so he said that it's clear to him that the non-religious Zionist leaders are like Yiftach. That they have this idea in their heads that they have to change reality. But they're like Yiftach, everything is very chaotic. It says about Yiftach that he wasn't from himself, or at least not in the way that his other brothers accepted him as a from person. He's Ben Ish Azonah, meaning he was also Zonah. Here doesn't mean again a prostitute.
Did he lead a wild bunch of
Right, it's called Anashim Reikim. He took empty people with him, empty from mitzvot, empty from. But they were willing to sacrifice themselves. And he comes with this attitude of, God has to be with me. I don't have to do anything for him, but he has to be with me. Why? What is this? Where did he get this? Where do you get such an attitude? So a few weeks ago, this video from Ben Gurion was making the rounds. And there, whoever the interviewer was, I guess this is like in the, when did he pass away? 1969? 68? I don't know exactly what year he passed away. So sometime in the 1960s. And
impacting things for him.
no, he wasn't. He went to his home in the desert. That was it.
Wrote his memoirs.
Right. But they still interviewed him. So the interviewer was very not from. And he asked him, where did you get the chutzpah, the gall, to do what you did? To declare a state, to do this? Where did you get all that? He says, because this is our land. So he said. So this interviewer was very tough on him. He said, "What do you mean it's our land? How do you know that it's our land?" So he says, "Because the Bible says so." So he says, "You believe everything that the Bible says?" He says, "This is our land." He keeps repeating that. So he tells him in the end, the interviewer gets like impatient because he's. Do you mean to say that God said that this is our land? So Ben Gurion says, you don't need to talk about God. So he says, what do you mean though? Because the whole Bible is God. He says, everything is God. Don't talk to me about God. Everything is God. It's just what it is. A Jew doesn't need to call upon God to have God.
Well,
Everything is God.
That's the good way.
So, what is it like? Don't talk to me about interpreting things. Like the way I saw it is like, it's this almost Spinoza-like attitude of pantheism. Everything is God. Don't talk to me about a transcendent God. Everything is God, period. It's like what the Ba'al Shem Tov says, Akol hu Hashem. Everything is God, period. But he doesn't have the other side, which is Hashem hu Akol, that God is everything. Everything is God starts from reality and says there's God. But he doesn't have the reverse side that the Ba'al Shem Tov said, which is God is everything. What's the difference? If you say everything is God, that's pantheism. It says everything here is God. What do you need more? When I say God is everything, I assume that there's a God who's separate from everything. There's first God, he becomes everything. So there's always a transcendent God. It's not just God in the immanence, the way that I see him here. But the first step apparently is like Yiftach. By the way, Yiftach is a story in Sefer Shoftim of an awakening of Jewish pride, if you want. Or this Jewish feeling that I can change reality. But it awakens through people like Yiftach. That's how the Rabbi explained it. That it has to awaken from people who don't yet, or either are not willing or can't, or whatever it is, they can't yet accept a concept of a transcendent God, of Hashem being also transcendent. It just has to be that this is, everything here is a God. That's what a Jew believes anyway.
Doesn't Rav Kook talk about that?
Yeah, something like that, called Shlemut and Ishtalmut. A little bit. That's also why he, in many ways, he related to the secular Zionists. Because he said in the end, they're like Yiftach. And it's more than that, that you see, and again, now I'm getting into something that, it's bordering on politics already, but I'm trying to get the spiritual sense out of it. That the people who had a transcendent God in that generation found it very difficult to leave the interpretative stance and to move into an active stance. Meaning they found it difficult to go from Rabbi Akiva, where all we can say is everything that God does is for the best, and go into a state of saying, this is the best. I'm going to turn it into, I'm going to affect reality and make it again, change the dust into weapons. They found it very difficult to do that. So you had like a split in the Jewish people, that there were parts of us that were connected to Hashem as everything, and therefore everything can be changed, and parts of us that were entirely transcendent, that couldn't see how something that's outside, like a transcendent God, can affect. All we can do is just look at it and at most say, this is all the workings of God and it's all for the best in the end. But it's not for me to affect it. So that's pretty much the situation that existed in the beginning of the state, or the beginning of Zionism, if you want. And those were the types of people that, there's actually, they had a whole brigade in the Palmach that was called, you actually see it, it's called Plugat Iftach, or Gdud Iftach, I don't know what it was called. Well, it was named after somebody. But the whole idea was that in a sense you're saying, we're like Iftach. Iftach, he has a problem, because really, in the end, he's not a very God-fearing man. But he has this feeling, he has this sense that God is supposed to be with me to affect and change reality. So that's the way it was in the beginning. And slowly you have to move, or quickly, hopefully quickly, you move to the stance of understanding that I have this ability to change reality, not in order just to create a state. That's nothing according to the Rebbe. It's not nothing, but it's just a sweet compared to the whole redemption. The whole redemption is the whole world changing. It's not just this one act that in the end only a very small number of Jews were involved in. It has to become that every Jew comes to this state of confidence that I have the ability to change reality, not just, again, as a national thing, but at my individual level, in whatever I'm involved in. And what does it mean to really change reality? Again, it's to take the transcendent God, who was removed, as it were, and it was only in an interpretative state, and bring him back into reality as something that affects reality in a very real way. So for the Rebbe, that's what it means. I'm just saying, the Rebbe bringing him as maybe the strongest example in our generation, but there were other people as well, like for instance for Busher and all the tzaddikim in that sense. The Chassidus started this understanding that I don't pray just to strengthen my ability to interpret things as good. I pray because it changes reality. I pray because I do mitzvot. Meaning, say it another way, that we're already so close to the future that the future is already like knocking on the door and saying, if in this world, in this world, say the sages, there is no reward, you can't see the reward for a mitzvah, but in the world to come you will see the reward. What are they trying to say? That all the rewards have been, stockpiled in the future and they're just waiting for you to get to the future? Or does it mean that in our present reality you can't see how a mitzvah affects reality, but in the future you will see their effect? Why? Because you will go back to the thinking of Nachum Ish Gamzu, and even before that, like Avram Avinu, of Italech Lefanai Ve'etamim, that you'll go back into the state saying that I can change reality, I can make reality holy again, I can make reality what it's not right now, not because I'm some magician, because that was the purpose of reality to begin with. I am uncovering its real purpose.
So a person can take that into his individual life bichlal, like this attitude, like going from this attitude to that attitude, and
because we're still somewhere on the border between these two states of consciousness, again, interpretative versus proactive. In psychology also, we have to, on the one hand, try to push for change, not just in how the client interprets what happened, but in how he forms the future. You have to push. You can't always do it, because we're not exactly fully in the state where this is understood by everybody. But it's becoming more and more realistic to try to tell somebody it's not just interpreting the past. It's not just saying it's for the best, but it's actually changing the present. And you change the present by, in a strange way, borrowing from the future. You're taking energy from the future. That's why it becomes so important, to envision. This whole process of conscious determination starts with envisioning, with having a belief about what the future is going to be like. So it has to start with that. Not start with it, but you have to incorporate that into the psychological therapy. That it's not just about how do I relate to the future, to the past. It's not just interpreting things in a better way. It's not just seeing how things are also good. Like we said, in Achna, seeing how God was carrying me all the while, I didn't realize, I didn't understand what divine providence means, and now I have a better picture of what it is. It's much more complex than just saying it's success. It's just the external good. It has to be more complex than that. It's not just giving you just the good.
Yeah.
So that's interpretative about the past. When we get to Havdalah, when we get to the stage of separation, we have to be looking more and more into the future. And imagining the future. Like, how does the future become good? Starting right now, at this moment. Repeat this again, but this is a muscle we're not used to using. Okay.
My whole life, when I heard about the Holocaust, I always took the point of view that we were helpless, and there was never anything we could do. And recently I've been following more of these stories of rescue, and all of a sudden, for the first time in my life, I feel a little bit like the Israeli attitude, like, why didn't we resist? We never, ever could have. It's just like defies imagination. I was watching this program about, I also read this book about the Bielski brothers, which is a story of how certain brothers who grew up Yiftach style, they were rough boys. So they, from the word go, the thought didn't cross their mind that they would go into the ghetto. The idea that they bought into was that every Jewish person, no matter what their age, was invited to join them, even though it lowered their possibility of survival. But from the beginning, they had a totally different attitude towards this persecution and this horror. From the beginning, it was unacceptable to them that they should go like sheep to slaughter. And then, all along the question, you don't know what to be surprised at. Should you be surprised that somebody thought that way? Or maybe you should be surprised that, in general, people didn't think that way, that it was like we were people of crushed spirit. We were people of exile. We were people of used to be taking all of this kind of stuff and always finding the reason why it was better to go along with it than to resist it. And, the attitude of Israel, traditionally, the Zionists, was we don't want to hear about these these sad stories where nobody did anything, so they would only talk about the uprising of the Warsaw Ghetto, and they wouldn't talk about everything else. All of a sudden, my mind went on their side. That why? It doesn't make sense. If some people were able to do it, why weren't more people able to do it?
So that's what I'm trying to say. That this is not. This story is not a story about being better fit or less fit. The story of the Jewish people, our history, is not a story of better, psychologically balanced people or less psychologically balanced. We're saying that the way that we react, whether it be just as interpreting reality, as being this is all for the best, or whether we react by saying Hashem wants me to succeed, these are changes not in our individual nature, but they have to do with the whole story of exile and redemption. Meaning that there's a spirit in the world that is pushing now in this direction of you have to adopt the Ba'al Shem Tov stance, which is that Hashem wants you to be successful. He wants you to push. He wants you to do something that the previous generations would have frowned upon, but not because it's wrong, but just because for them that was not the spirit that was in the world at that time. They were brought up on the spirit of Yiddishkeit that existed then. It's not even an evolution as much as it is a shift that's going on in the world. As redemption comes closer, it's a shift in our consciousness that has to occur. And we're in the middle. I mean, we can't. I don't think even somebody who was brought up in Israel and so on, very quickly and easily can you slip back as an individual back into the sheep to the slaughter mentality. Why? Not because there's something wrong with you, but because it still exists. It's still around. There's still this faction of spirituality that permeates reality. It's still here. And there's a lot of Jews that only relate to that. They can't find yet how to, especially because the ones, normally the people who did relate to the Yiftach, or Rabbi Hanina ben Taradion, or Nachum Ish Gamzu, are more like Yiftach than they are like Nachum Ish Gamzu. Meaning they're more secular than they are frum. The change in the frumkeit is something that the Ba'al Shem Tov tried to herald, and it caught on in some circles. It caught on to a certain degree, but it wasn't complete. And why is it not complete? Because we still have to wait, in a certain sense, for it to permeate strongly enough. Even just having this type of class and understanding that confidence, trust in Hashem means that Hashem has given me the power to change reality. This is a very uncommon, as far as I know, it's a very uncommon class.
Yeah, that's using
it's
a
not
delusion.
something,
That's the delusion that we should exchange for the other delusion.
Exactly.
But the people, New Age was always saying this, and those were not religious people, and they got it. They were saying it forever. They didn't need the Ba'al Shem Tov to say consciousness was coming, was changing, was evolving, was shifting. They all said that. It has to, because there was no other way
So
for
what do
it
they
to
say
go.
today?
But it doesn't come out of holiness.
I know that, but I'm just saying it
Right.
because you said look how hard it's taking for the from people to get it. The
Let's say it in a different way. Okay, let's also say it in a different way. There's a famous story from the Mittler Rebbe that somebody once came to him and asked him, how do I conquer the Yetzer Hara? How do I conquer the evil inclination? So the Mittler Rebbe told him, to conquer the evil inclination, you have to know who he is, what his name is. What is he suggesting? That he changes. That he has a different name each time. You can't pin him down by just saying, what was he 1,000 years ago? Today he's something else. He says in the time of Adam and Eve, he was a serpent, he was a snake. Later, he became, in the time of 1,000 years later, he became Malach HaMavet. He became the angel of death. He brought death into the world. So you had to be afraid of death. That's the evil inclination. Think about that. There's no Torah yet. Right? When did death start? When Adam was 930 years old. He was the first one to encounter death, as it were. You could say that maybe Cain already killed the devil, that was death. But it wasn't okay, maybe you can go there. So after 130 years, when Cain killed the devil, here's the evil inclination, death. It's to look for death. And you have to, so you can understand, or to kill other people. And you can understand why Cain then says, Vayakol Motzia Argeni. He says to Hashem, why should you not let me be killed? Because it's a bad thing. I learned. I have to overcome my evil inclination. What's my evil inclination? Death. You have to run away from it. Then he says, later it became the Satan. It became this evil angel that comes to you and convinces you to do a bad thing. But he says, but he's not called that anymore. He says every time there was a tzaddik who uncovered that this is who he is, and so he went back up to Shemaim, the evil inclination. He said, Hashem, I don't have anything more to do in the world. Everybody knows who I am. So kill me. I don't want to be alive. So he says, no, I'll send you back down with a different name. Then nobody will know it's you. He says, later he became the Yesh. What is Yesh? Being. Self.
I, ego.
Ego.
That's already in the Middle Ages, when there began to be social mobility. And then later, he became the feeling of Yesh. Just a sense that you don't have to have you don't have to really have an ego. Meaning, an ego means that you would stamp anybody who would stand in your way. An ego means you're an overpowering individual. But today you don't have to. You don't. From the 1800s and on, you don't have to be an overpowering individual. It's enough that you feel. It's enough that you feel that you have an ego. You don't actually have to prove it. You'll follow your negative impulses anyway, just because you feel that you have an ego. And then he says, but in our generation, it's already become just shtus.
What's that mean?
Foolishness.
Folly.
Stupidness. So he says, if you want to combat the evil inclination today, that's all you have to. Just be serious. Don't be a fool. Don't act like an idiot. What is he saying here, really? That the evil inclination is no longer this terrible, formidable force that was so cruel and terrible and scary. The Satan.
Then what's
He's not that
supposed
anymore.
to represent?
He's not even your ego anymore.
What's
What is he?
So it's wasting your time with nonsense?
Yeah, exactly. All the people, right?
But what about
What are you doing? It's waste. All he's looking for is for you to waste your time. Be a fool, shtus. You know how you combat him, he told him? You have to do holy foolishness. What's holy foolishness? Shtus of Kedusha. Go to some Jew on the street and waste your time there. Doing what? Are you Jewish? You want to put tefillin on? Waste your time. But do it with something holy. Waste your time. Walk around telling people. Venice Beach. He sits on Venice Beach, and anybody that comes up, you Jewish? I'll give you your Jewish horoscope. What's your Jewish horoscope? It's the day when you were born. He had his luach of 120 years. I guess in the later years he did it with his phone, or maybe he didn't get to that. I'm not sure. So he converts it to the Hebrew date, and then he opens the chitas on that date, right? The Chumash and the Tanya, and for those 2 dates, for that date, and he'd read it to him and explain it to him, and then he'd interpret it and say, "This is telling you that your mission in life is about everything." So that's a shtus of kedusha. And anybody who's a Talmud Chacham looks at that and says, "What are you doing? What are you wasting your time on?" He says, "No, that's holy shtus. That's holy foolery. Because what are you doing? You're connecting the heart of a Jew back to Hashem, back to the Torah. Suddenly the Torah is some kind of soothsaying device. It's a horoscope, but it's a holy horoscope. It's shtus to make the Torah into that. But it doesn't matter. That's all you need to battle him today. He's that weak. In the same sense, and this is where it's harder to say, but it has to be said. In the same sense, when Hashem leaves us in exile in a state of being only able to interpret, and you don't feel that Hashem is empowering you, He's only helping you get through it, but He's not empowering you to change it, so Hashem becomes weaker and weaker as time goes by. You feel that He's less and less involved. Because all He can do is offer you a little bit of comfort at the end. But what about changing the reality? If I'm ill, I want it changed. I don't want to hear in the end Said, I'm a devout, I'm a pious Jew, I understand that it's all for the best and so on. It's all true. But what about what you promised me? Just this week we read it. I am Hashem your healer. What about that? Hashem, I want you to heal me. No, that used to be. What do you mean that used to be? It says it in the Parsha.
Oh yeah, it says that it used to be somewhere.
People say it used to be that way. There used to be a prophet, and if you were sick or ill, you went to the prophet, and the prophet would do something. What would he do? He'd pray. That's what he did. And you'd be healed, okay? Or he'd tell you to do something, like Elisha had Naaman, the war minister of Ammon, come to him, and he's a leper from young age, and he comes and he says, whatever you tell me as the prophet of God, I'll do. So he says, since you're God-fearing, you really are God-fearing. How did he hear about this? Because they had captured a Jewish girl. He became a servant in his house, and she taught him about that there's Hashem and he's the master of the world and so on, and you should go to his prophet and you'll be healed. So he went, he believed in it. So Elisha tells him, all you have to do is go into the Jordan and immerse there, and you'll come out and you'll be healthy. And that's exactly what happened. Well, where is that God? Where did he go? Why isn't he working this way now? Why is it that we have to give people chemotherapy? What happened? So he's in an interpretative stance. You want to bring him out? It's not just up to you. He also has to want. He's not for hire, as it were. You can't tell him what to do. But when the time comes, and he's telling you through the Ba'al Shem Tov, through other tzaddikim, that the time now is for you to be proactive, you have to start being proactive. You have to start understanding that that the way you should be thinking about things is not just, I have to interpret it to be for the best, I have to turn it into the best. Again, the whole idea is that you have to be like Shmuel, not like Yiftach. Even Yiftach knew how to get Hashem's attention, and he got him to win the war for him. But there was something completely wrong with it, because in the end he had to give up his daughter's life for it. But Shmuel, it says Yiftach b'doro Shmuel b'doro.
Was that a common practice?
To make a vow. Yeah, it's not just a common practice.
To sacrifice a person?
No, that was not a common practice at all.
Yeah.
In fact, that's contradictory.
Yeah.
The fact that, and we said that, why wasn't he willing to renounce this vow, which you're allowed to? Right? It's like a neder that you made, that I have to sacrifice, but I didn't know that the first thing that would come out would be my daughter. So you can renounce it, you can annul it. And even Yiftach means to open a vow, to open a neder. So why didn't he do it? Because of his pride. We learned this, right? Remember this? That the Medrash says that Pinchas was the high priest then, and he should have gone to him. But it also says Pinchas should have come to him, knowing that this is what happened. Why didn't he come to him and tell him, Yiftach, let's annul this vow. You don't need to sacrifice your daughter.
Don't let the feminists see it.
It says because of their pride, in the end, this daughter lost her life. Because each one has pride. What is his pride? Because what does the vow do? That's exactly the problem. It's not just to empower you. If it's to empower you, that's Yiftach. It's to empower you as a servant of Hashem. It's not just to empower you as Yiftach. Not just to empower you as Joe Schmo. It's to empower you as like Moshe Rabbeinu, Eved Hashem.
Isn't there such a thing that a vow that is against the Torah isn't valid?
Okay, but he didn't make a vow that was against the Torah at the time.
Wasn't against the
If you say the vow can't do it, you can't say it on a mitzvah. If you would have made a vow and said, when I come back, Hashem, I want you to win this war for me, and when I come back, I'll sacrifice my daughter, that vow is not worth anything. It's not worth anything. Why? Because you can't make a vow
So that's
to...
what he did.
No, he said, the first thing that comes out of my house. He didn't know what it was. I imagine he assumed it would be a sheep. And that's what he thought he would sacrifice.
Yeah, that's stupid.
Stupid, not stupid. In the end...
But it's the same thing.
No, it's very different. Because he's not making a vow to do something wrong. It turns out that the vow he made, given the circumstances, is going now to require him to do something wrong. So that's why you can annul it. You're allowed to annul it because of that. But he was afraid, we explained this, his ego. What does it mean that he was afraid for his ego? He was afraid that if he would annul the vow which had caused him to win the war, he would eventually lose the war. Meaning that the circumstances would change and the Canaanites would conquer.
He doesn't keep his end in the bargain.
Right.
Hashem doesn't keep
Hashem doesn't keep his.
his. I still don't understand.
But who does that? If you think about it as I and Hashem are equal, that we have a pact here. It's not a pact. I'm your servant. If I want to do something, it has to be something that you want me to do. Okay? It's not that we made an agreement.
He was breaking the law by saying, I'm going to sacrifice.
No.
As soon as it turned out that it was a human being, he was breaking the law.
Right, then you can annul it. But he didn't do anything that was annulled to begin with. Because there's certainly a situation in which he could have performed what he made a vow for. But again, his ego was caught up in the changes in reality that he had created. Because he felt the reality is mine, it's not yours. It's almost the same thing as when you get married, your wife doesn't become yours. You're right, we have a special relationship. You have to take care of her, she has to take care of you, all these things. It's all wonderful, but it's not ownership. The fact that I changed reality doesn't make it mine, doesn't make reality mine. It's Hashem's. I'm just the agent of change. That's how I have to see myself. But the agent of change is not an interpreter. He's somebody who changes reality. And that's the teaching of the Ba'al Shem Tov here in respect to confidence. That you have to have this confidence that I can really change what's going on.
So, you said that it's a shift in the world, which opens up the possibility for a shift in consciousness.
Right.
And is that like available to every Jew?
To every Jew.
It is. It's not
Except
like
if he
different
feels,
kinds of
and again, here I'm trying to teach people to be accepting. Meaning that if there's somebody who's not ready for it, so it's not the time for him yet. If he hears this and he says, it's just not going to work. So fine, so let's learn some more. And first of all, I want to convince you that this is the way that they lived in the time of the temple and before the temple was even erected.
What, this way?
This way. I want to show you enough examples that this is how they lived. That Hashem was an active force, not used as an interpretative force. And then if you still feel that this is not for you because, I don't know what, you're afraid that it'll become like some kind
You
of...
won't like it.
You'll abuse it in some way.
That could bring up a lot of
Or you can still feel,
Yes, very
it's just,
much resistance.
it's fine, okay. It's not for you yet. But if you do have this sense that we have a responsibility to change reality, so I want you to do it with Hashem. I want you to do it as Hashem's servant. Not to make up an agenda that you made up this morning because that's how you woke up. But to really look at what your purpose in the world is. What did Hashem put you here? And in terms of being a servant of Hashem, what am I supposed to change? To look at it that way. So for instance, I've one of the most, I'm not going to mention names, but I think I may have told you this story once. And if not, it's a story worth telling again. I met a very special individual 10 years ago. I actually met him 15 years ago, but then only 10 years ago I learned his story that he was a young Ba'al Tshuva, I guess in his early 20s, and he was set up with a girl who was frum, but couldn't get married because she couldn't have children. The doctors told her you can't have children. And so before she even went out with somebody, she was very open, because everybody knows you have to be open. So she used to say, I can't have children, do you want to meet? So obviously there weren't many takers. He was the first one that met her, because it was about tshuva. She asked him on the first date, why did you agree to see me? So he said, because I want to have a family. So she said, didn't you understand what I told you, that I can't have children? So he was a young Ba'al Tshuva. He said, I'll pray. So he prayed. How long did he pray? For 25 years he prayed. And the doctors, she told me, we knew both of them, she told me, the doctors told me that, hair would grow on my palm before I had children. She has 5 children now.
What?
She has 5 children.
Wow.
They have 5 children. It took 25 years, and he didn't just pray. This is not like he went to Shachris, Mincha, Ma'ariv. Shachris was, every day, I witnessed it, I was with him for a year, where he was doing this. From 7:30 he'd be in the mikveh, and he'd finish at 12. He'd daven for 4-5 hours every single day, for 25 years. And something that is a miracle by any standards happened, but it's not a miracle anymore. Because it was a miracle the first time, but after 5 children, it's not a miracle anymore.
The miracle is that he didn't lose his faith for 25 years.
Yeah,
That's
it's a long time. Yes.
But that's
To
what
have
it means.
such faith.
But that's what it means
That's
to
a lot of
be a
praying.
servant of Hashem. I came here to have a family. I'm not going to look, again, it's like
The
craziness.
rabbi would have told him, just
What are you
make
doing?
your peace with this.
Yeah,
just stop
give
with
up.
everybody else.
Give
and go
up.
to
Just
work.
interpret it as this is for the best. And he said, no. Because what do I know? That Hashem said there's a mitzvah to have children. So I'm going to have children, period. And he
So
did.
he was attracted to her because she couldn't have children.
No,
That's weird.
he
You
was
would've
attracted
thought-
to her because he was attracted to her.
Yeah.
And he said, but that statement, the pashtus, the simplicity with which he said, so I'll pray, he's a Breslover. If it helps understanding. He became about you with the Breslov. But just to even be able to say that statement is something that a lot of Jews are afraid of saying.
It's a
What do you mean?
personality thing, though.
What do you mean
It's
you'll
a
pray?
personality
What,
thing.
hocus pocus? What do you want to tell us? No, they went to all the best fertility clinics and did everything. Nothing helped. But eventually it did help. So what changed? What changed was that he wasn't willing to give up on Hashem as a force of change. Okay? He wasn't willing to give up on that because that's what he was taught. He's about tshuva. He's very silly. He says, what do you mean? It says, if you pray, Hashem answers. Period. That's it.
No, but he learned that he might not answer what you want. I'm sure.
He might not answer what you want.
Yeah, for 25
He
years,
might
whatever
not.
that is.
He might not. The answer might be different than what you think. But it can't be against the Torah. If the Torah says that I'm supposed to have children, I'm supposed to have children. Period. I did what I need to do. Now you do what you need to do. It's a very different attitude. And a lot
It's
of
an
Jews...
obstinate
there are-
personality. It's a certain kind of personality.
It
You
is.
say no, yes.
Okay.
It's a certain personality.
And by the way, and again, it really scares a lot of frum Jews. Because what are you saying? You're testing Hashem? I'm not testing Hashem. It's not a test. It's perseverance. It's an understanding that if Hashem wants the world to be a certain way, I'm His agent of change. Could it be that it won't happen through me? Moshe Rabbeinu, did he ever give up on coming into Eretz Yisrael? No. Until the last day he waited to come into Eretz Yisrael. Hashem told him to stop praying. Okay, I'll stop praying. I'll do something else. The only thing I have is to pray. I'll have other options.
Well, one of the examples I think with Moshe Rabbeinu is how he included the Erev Rav. Against all odds.
Also.
You couldn't tell,
There's a lot of
tell
things.
otherwise.
Okay, a lot of things.
But
But-
here, isn't it also like just the tmirut? Like I'll pray,
Yes,
I
yes.
believe that I can
Yes.
pray, and
And by the way, that's why it's only prayer in the sense, because we said tmimut is passive confidence. That's exactly what it is. It's a passive state of confidence. It's not that I have, by the way, he also has, I think, a lot of bitachon. He has a lot of confidence, active confidence. Because they also did everything that needed to be
He didn't know that it was
done.
ever going to be.
Of course he didn't. You're not a prophet. But this is exactly what prophecy is about.
It's a certain kind of
What we don't see though is that, we say he prayed for 25 years. We didn't see the shifts in him. And then, there's a lot of things that change. It's
Of
not about
course.
just give me.
When he
Because
started
I've heard
out,
that Hashem always wanted to give us and always wants to give
no
us
question.
the best.
He is one
But
of the
we're not.
most. He is one of the most beloved Jews in every single Hasidic and non-Hasidic court.
Mm-hmm.
He's everywhere. If you go to North America, everybody knows his name.
Mm-hmm.
He's like he's a walking poster child for this is what a Baal Tshuva can become. It's like, that's what they look at him. To say that he's a Talmid Chacham, I don't know how much of a Talmid Chacham he is. But he's much more of a Talmid Chacham in prayer than I am. He knows it much better than I do.
So we can pray even to get to that stage of wanting to affect reality.
It changed him completely. It changed his wife. It changed, and these kids are growing.
It's not for everybody.
What?
It's not for everybody.
Yes,
25 years maybe is not for
It has to
everybody.
be.
But the attitude is not just an individual attitude in the sense you can just say this is a psychological type of individuality. It's the psyche of the individual. This is something that when it comes to serving Hashem is open to everybody today.
Yeah.
It's a question whether you're willing to pursue it or not.
I think we give up because we don't change. Kilu, we think we're doing a religious act, and it's like you're asking the same thing.
We're very afraid. We're tremendously.
You're right. No, you're right. I believe, I've done it, and I think like sometimes I repeat the same thing, thinking I'm going to have different results, and it's not that. It's about because something else like needs to change. Like I don't know.
Any rabbi probably that he would have gone to would tell him that
No.
he shouldn't necessarily follow this.
No, so we went to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe told him to continue.
Yeah.
Continue?
But what are you saying we're afraid of?
We're afraid of
Well,
the
that
failure.
was helping to get
Why?
Rebbe's-
Because
Rebbe.
our ego is very much
Result.
in a state of not truly being a servant of Hashem.
You're right.
Because I take the failure as Hashem failed.
No.
That's how I understand the failure. Hashem is weak. And I don't want to feel that.
Wait.
What's the truth? That it's my failure, not his. That's very difficult for a person to come to.
What's the difficulty?
So that's rectifying the ego.
Torah to nefesh, it's not
Said it after you learn Torah to Nefesh. So you understand it.
said that
You understand that if there's failure, it's mine.
Hashem didn't make it happen.
But
Instead of saying,
and once I own the
"Not
failure,
not
Hashem can have
not
compassion
not
on me.
Hashem.
And that stage is very hard for most people to do, and therefore I think that even though the door is open, again, my story that I told you 100 times.
Why aren't you telling us the name of
Yeah,
this?
I don't know if he wants people to know.
You
Yeah, he
just
does.
everybody
Everybody
knows
knows the story, but whatever. It doesn't matter. When I went to Reb Usher and he told me, "You don't believe yet." So I don't know if I understood it then, but when I came to Rav Ginsburg, I understood what he meant. What do you mean you don't believe it? You don't have confidence yet.
Mm-hmm.
You're not confident that you can get over this. When you decide that for serving Hashem you can get over this, you'll get over this. Whatever this is. And if to serve Hashem I need the wall now to throw money out like an ATM machine, that's what the wall is going to do.
So the break test is in the
And
ego.
it's
The ego
Yeah, I'm
has
still
to
getting
break.
over the table.
The ego has to accept that if there's failure, it's because I am not yet serving Hashem. I'm still doing it for me. That's the difference between Yiftach and Shmuel. Yiftach is doing it for Yiftach's greatness. He wants to be readmitted into his family who ostracized him because he was the son of a non-frum woman, maybe even a Goya, not sure. It's not even clear what the whole story is. He wants to be allowed back into where he was. So he does things in Hashem's name, but in the end, when push comes to shove, you see that he's doing it for himself. Why? Because he's not willing to annul the vow. He's afraid of everything turning back to what it was. But with Shmuel, I don't want to get into all the stories of Shmuel now, but with somebody who's serving Hashem, if there's failure, it's mine. Don't leave Hashem out of it. It's my failure. I'm willing to take the responsibility for my failures. I know that it's me. I haven't tried hard enough yet.
What the story with?
By the way, that's how you don't fall into despair also. Again, it's not being a victim. It's all these things that we've talked about so many times. If I leave you to say Hashem failed, so what are you? You're just a victim and you have no power. Why try again even? Because Hashem doesn't want it. There's a million things I can say. But if I tell you, no, the time has changed. The Ba'al Shem Tov is telling you from now on it's you. But with you comes the responsibility that when you fail, you failed, not Hashem failed. So don't fall into despair. There's an opening at least.
Because
if
you
I
take
tried,
lifetimes also?
okay, no,
No, I heard that and I liked it because that means you can also
Maybe.
feel, I failed, okay, I failed, but I tried, okay, I didn't do it right, now I'm going to try it this way,
that's
and this way, and
certainly.
this way, and then
Certainly.
even this lifetime I'm not going to get it,
But
for
even-
whatever reason, there's something.
So there's a famous story when it comes to, for instance, children. So there's a famous story from the Ba'al Shem Tov about a couple that the Ba'al Shem Tov kept telling them, they kept coming to the Ba'al Shem Tov, and he kept saying, you wouldn't bless them with children. Time and time again they asked, and he wasn't willing to give them a blessing. Eventually, one time he told them, look, I want you to understand why I can't give you a blessing. So he told them to close their eyes, and it says that he took them to some city, and in their vision they see this town, and it's full of beautiful children, all Yiddish children, and he says to them, ask them what their name is. So they ask the girl, what's your name? I don't remember what the Chaya Malka, something like that. That's the woman's name. They ask the boys, they're all Shmuel David or something like that, the husband's name. Everybody is called by them. Everybody is named after them. And they understand what this is. So he brings them out of the vision, and he tells them, know that with the tzedakah and the things that you've been doing, you've given birth to all these children. They're all named after you. They're your descendants. Don't think that you're without descendants. You have hundreds of descendants that you don't even know about. I can't give you this blessing because if I give that to you, you won't be able to claim all of this. Whatever the cheshbon in Shemaim is, he doesn't tell them. He doesn't. But know that what you're doing, this is given birth to.
It's like the story of the famous midwife from Sharon Tzedek who had no children. She was the midwife.
Yeah.
And for many, many years, she brought many children and helped many mothers, and she never had her own children.
So this is.
She had like a calling.
This is interpretative, right? It's not. It's that everything that Hashem is doing.
She was famous.
So this is like saying everything Hashem is doing is for the best. It says that, I'm not sure it's the same couple. There was another couple that he told them this is. There was another couple that said, no, we want children anyway. So he said, okay. So he gave them a blessing for children. And then they had a child. And then they lost everything they had. And they came back to him and he said it was either this or that. I tried to dissuade you. But in whatever direction you want to go, Hashem will take it. You can lead Hashem. It's up to you. So when you weren't content with this, I had to show you what you were doing already. If you're not content on it, be it as you want.
The story of Yiftach, I just wanted to point out that Yehuda and Tamar has a lot of similarity. That about when she says to him, when she's willing to sacrifice herself from that point of view. But there's like there's a great praise of Yehuda for the fact that he owned up to what he had done. Now the truth is I find it a little odd. Why is that considered such an act of greatness? Was he supposed to just let her,
Yeah.
you know?
He could have.
He could have, but he's Yehuda. I mean, why are we so surprised that why does he deserve to be king for that? Why is he considered such a, I guess it's that difficult. That's really the point, that it is that difficult.
I don't think that's the way to read it. I think what happened was nobody would have known if she would have burned.
Nobody would have known that. Yeah.
Nobody would have known anything.
But she gave him the option not to commit.
She gave him the option.
And then
because he chose the right choice, he became king. What does it mean? Yehuda himself was never a king. It means that the offspring that came out of Tamar, they became the lineage.
But isn't it sort of like kind of basic?
But he could have made the wrong choice. I don't hold him as like, wow. I'm not saying, wow, what an incredible individual. What I'm saying is, look at the incredible consequences.
Yeah, so that the
of the
Yiftach fell
choice,
short. Yiftach fell
and
short.
Yiftach made the wrong
Right,
choice.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we have to finish also after davening. Okay, so thank you everybody for joining, and B'ezrat Hashem, next class is, whoever is joining is on Sunday, and after that Monday and Tuesday, God willing, next week.